In the vast, silent prairie of the heart, true strength is not found in enduring the storm, but in learning to grow in the parched earth it leaves behind. The dust of the altar settled on Eliza's simple dress, a borrowed garment for a borrowed future. She stood beside Corbin, a man carved from the hard Texas earth, his face a mask of grim possession. She could feel the weight of his stare, cold and assessing. This union was a desperate bargain, a trade of her freedom for her family's survival. Their small farm was brittle with drought, their bellies aching with a familiar emptiness. Corbin's land, however, flowed with water, and he had promised relief. As the preacher spoke hollow words of devotion, Eliza looked out at her parents. Their faces were etched with a mixture of hope and sorrow. They were trusting her to save them, and that trust was a heavier burden than any vow. The door to the ranch house closed with a final heavy sound. The wedding night had arrived. Corbin turned from the door, his polite facade falling away like a snake shedding its skin. "Let us be clear," he said, his voice flat and hard. "The arrangement is complete. This house, this land, and you are now my property." Eliza felt a chill creep up her spine. "And my family? The supplies you promised?" Corbin laughed, a dry, cruel sound. "Your family will receive nothing. Their land, with its precious spring, will soon be mine. You were simply the price of admission." The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thick with his betrayal. Her hope curdled into pure, cold dread. She had not saved her family. She had condemned them. "You are a monster," Eliza whispered, her voice trembling with a rage that eclipsed her fear. She backed away from him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I will not let you do this." His eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "You have no choice in the matter." He moved toward her, his steps slow and deliberate, a predator cornering his prey. When she tried to run past him, he grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. She fought back, a wild, desperate struggle. In his fury, he shoved her hard. She fell awkwardly, her leg twisting beneath her. A sickening crack echoed in the silent room, followed by a wave of white-hot agony that stole her breath and her consciousness. Pain was the first thing she knew when she awoke. A searing, relentless fire in her leg, which was now crudely splinted. She was a prisoner in her own bedroom, the door locked from the outside. Days bled into one another, each one a fresh torment. Corbin would bring her food and water, his presence a constant, suffocating threat. He would look at her broken form with a smug satisfaction, reminding her of her powerlessness. "Every step you take for the rest of your life will be a reminder of who is in charge," he would sneer. The physical pain was immense, but the pain of her failure, the thought of her family starving while she was trapped here, was a far greater torture. It was a pain that began to temper her spirit into something hard and sharp. Weeks turned into a month of agonizing captivity. The physical torment from Corbin was a constant shadow, but Eliza learned to retreat deep within herself, to a place he could not touch. Her will did not break. It hardened. She endured his taunts and his cruelty with a stoic silence that infuriated him. While her body was confined, her mind was free and sharp. She began to watch, to listen, to learn. She memorized the heavy tread of the ranch hands, the timing of their patrols, the way the late afternoon sun cast long shadows that could hide a fugitive. The pain in her leg was a constant reminder of her mistake, but it also became the fuel for a burning, singular purpose: escape. Her plan began to form in secret. When Corbin brought her meals, she would force herself to eat, but she always saved a small piece of jerky or a hard biscuit, hiding the morsels in a loose floorboard beneath her bed. It was a meager hoard, but it represented hope. She studied the lock on her door, the hinges on the window. She listened to the changing of the guard at night, noting a brief period when the west side of the house was unobserved. She was weak, and her leg was a wreck of shattered bone and torn muscle. But her resolve was pure iron. She would not die here. She would not be his broken thing. She would find a way to be free, or die trying. One evening, Corbin entered her room with a familiar, menacing glint in his eyes. He had been drinking, and his cruelty was always sharper when fueled by whiskey. "It is time you learned a new lesson in obedience," he slurred, moving toward her bed. But this time, Eliza was ready. For days she had been working to loosen a small, decorative metal pin from the headboard of her bed. It was not much of a weapon, but it was sharp. As he reached for her, his shadow falling over her, her hand closed around the cool, hard steel of the pin. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm, a drumbeat for the desperate act she was about to commit. This was her only chance. With a cry that was part fear and part fury, she lunged upward. She drove the sharpened metal pin deep into his shoulder. Corbin roared in pain and surprise, stumbling backward, his hand flying to the new wound. The shock on his face was her shield. It gave her the precious seconds she needed. She threw herself from the bed, ignoring the explosion of agony from her leg as she hit the floor. She did not look back. Scrabbling, crawling, she pulled herself out of the room, leaving the stunned and bleeding Corbin behind her. The hallway was empty. Freedom was a few agonizing yards away. The race for her life had begun. Each movement was a fresh wave of torture. Eliza dragged herself down the hallway, her broken leg a dead weight, leaving a smear of dirt and sweat on the polished floorboards. The sounds of Corbin's enraged shouting from the bedroom spurred her onward. She could not think about the pain. She could only think about the open door at the end of the hall, the portal to the dark, concealing night. Her hands were raw, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She reached the main room, a vast space filled with the ghosts of her shattered dreams. The front door was so close. She pulled herself up using a heavy chair, her vision swimming with black spots from the exertion. The cool night air was a shock to her skin as she tumbled out of the house. The stable was a dark shape against the star-dusted sky, a sanctuary and her only hope. She half-crawled, half-limped toward it, the soft earth a small mercy after the hard floors. Inside, the familiar scent of horse and hay filled her lungs. The animals shifted nervously in their stalls. Her hands, slick with sweat, fumbled with the leather straps of a saddle. She chose a sturdy mare, whispering soothing words to the nervous animal. Shouts from the house grew louder. They were coming for her. With a final, desperate surge of strength, she heaved the saddle onto the horse's back. She led the horse out of the stable, her body screaming in protest. Mounting was an impossible task, but she managed it, pulling herself into the saddle with a guttural cry of pain. She did not bother with the reins, simply wrapping her hands in the mare's mane and kicking its sides with her good leg. The horse bolted, leaping into a gallop, away from the ranch house and its glowing windows. She clung to its back, the jarring motion sending daggers of agony up her leg. Behind her, she heard the sounds of men and horses, the beginning of the hunt. She rode blindly into the vast, dark prairie, a wounded animal fleeing the pack. The prairie was a sea of blackness, endless and unforgiving. The moon offered little light, and the stars were cold, distant witnesses to her flight. The initial rush of adrenaline faded, replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The throbbing in her leg became an all-consuming universe of pain. Her grip on the horse's mane weakened. Her head grew light, the landscape blurring into a meaningless swirl of shadow. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but she knew they were still out there. Finally, her strength gave out completely. Her hands slipped, and she tumbled from the saddle, landing in a heap on the hard, dusty ground as the horse galloped on without her. Dawn broke across the plains, painting the sky in shades of gray and rose. A lone figure on horseback moved across the vast emptiness, his eyes scanning the horizon. He was Askuk, a Comanche warrior, his face set in the stern lines of a man who knew this land and its hardships. His gaze caught on a dark shape crumpled on the ground, a splash of color that did not belong. He guided his horse closer, his hand resting near the knife at his belt. He expected to find a dead settler, another victim of the harsh land. Instead, he found a woman, barely conscious, her face pale and streaked with dirt. Her leg was twisted at a terrible angle, the crude splint broken. Askuk dismounted, his movements fluid and silent. He knelt beside her, his presence calm and deliberate. He saw the terror in her eyes as she flinched away from him. He held up a hand, palm open, a universal sign of peace. He looked at her leg, his expression unreadable. The injury was severe, the work of brutal force. This was not an accident. He gently touched the swollen flesh, his fingers surprisingly careful as he assessed the damage. He knew she could not survive out here alone. Without a word, he carefully lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected. He placed her on his horse, mounting behind her to hold her steady. Eliza drifted in and out of consciousness. She was aware of the steady rhythm of the horse, the solid presence of the man holding her, and the alien sounds of a language she did not understand. When she finally opened her eyes, she was lying on a soft buffalo robe inside a teepee. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and unfamiliar herbs. An old man with a face like a dried riverbed was tending to her leg. He worked with quiet concentration, his hands skilled and gentle as he cleaned the wound and set the bone. The pain was still there, but it was a duller, more manageable ache. She was in a Comanche camp, a place she had been taught to fear all her life. Later, Askuk entered the teepee, carrying a small bowl of water. He knelt beside her and offered it. She drank greedily, the cool liquid a balm to her parched throat. "Who did this?" he asked, his English slow and measured, each word carefully chosen. His dark eyes held a quiet intensity. She looked at him, at the genuine concern in his face, and saw not the savage of the stories she had heard, but a man, a protector. "My husband," she whispered, the word tasting like poison on her tongue. A flicker of understanding, and something harder, passed through his eyes. He simply nodded, accepting her word without question. In that moment, a fragile thread of trust was spun between them. Back at the ranch, Corbin's rage was a physical storm. His shoulder throbbed where the woman had stabbed him, a humiliating wound that fueled his fury. But it was her escape, her defiance, that truly enraged him. She had made a fool of him. He paced his study, his boots loud on the wooden floor, his mind churning with plans for revenge. He would not just bring her back, he would make an example of her. He would crush her spirit completely, and he would use her disappearance to achieve his ultimate goal, the complete eradication of the Comanche who dared to hunt on lands he considered his own. He would turn his personal vendetta into a righteous war. He rode hard for the army outpost at Fort Griffin, his arm in a sling, his face a mask of practiced grief and outrage. He stormed into the commander's office, a man named Major Davies, known for his harsh stance on the native tribes. "Major," Corbin began, his voice thick with false emotion, "my wife, my dear Eliza, has been taken, stolen from our very home by a band of Comanche heathens. They raided my ranch, wounded me, and dragged her away." He painted a vivid picture of a brutal attack, a fabrication built on a foundation of pure malice. He knew which words would stir the major's blood, which lies would be most easily believed. Major Davies listened, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his desk. Corbin's story confirmed all his own prejudices. He saw an opportunity for a decisive strike, a chance to earn a commendation and finally pacify the territory. He did not question the details. He did not wonder why a raiding party would take one woman and leave everything else. He saw only what he wanted to see, an outrage that demanded a military response. "Mr. Corbin, you have my word," the major declared, his voice ringing with authority. "We will hunt down these savages, we will rescue your wife and see that justice is done." Within the hour, a company of cavalry was preparing to ride out. A young Comanche scout, moving like a ghost across the plains, saw the column of blue-coated soldiers leaving the fort. He watched them ride toward the tribe's winter camp, the dust from their horses a rising plume of death. He rode like the wind, his horse's hooves barely seeming to touch the ground, to bring the news. He burst into the camp, his message a torrent of urgent words. "Soldiers, many soldiers, coming this way." A grim silence fell over the council. Askuk listened, his face hardening. He knew this was not a coincidence. The woman's husband was behind this. Her desperate flight for freedom had inadvertently led a new and terrible danger directly to his people. Eliza heard the commotion in the camp. the urgent voices of the warriors, the worried murmurs of the women. She saw the men preparing their weapons, their faces grim and determined. A cold dread washed over her as she pieced together the fragments of conversation she could understand. Soldiers. A woman taken. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that they were talking about her. Corbin had done this. He had twisted her escape into an act of war, and now these people, who had shown her nothing but kindness, were going to pay the price. The weight of her guilt was heavier than the pain in her leg. She had to do something. She found Askuk by the creek, sharpening the blade of a lance. His movements were precise, his focus absolute. She limped toward him, her heart pounding. "It is my fault," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The soldiers are coming because of me." He stopped his work and looked at her, his expression unreadable. She told him everything, the story pouring out of her in a rush of shame and desperation. The lie of their marriage, Corbin's greed for her family's land and its water, his cruelty. She explained that she had not been stolen, but had run away to save her own life. She expected to see anger or blame in his eyes. Instead, Askuk listened with a quiet intensity. As she spoke, an idea, a desperate flicker of a memory, surfaced in Eliza's mind. "The papers," she said suddenly. "He has papers in a safe in his study. He bragged about them." She explained that Corbin had tricked other local ranchers, signing contracts that promised them access to water from her family's spring. But it was all a lie. He planned to dam the spring and keep all the water for his own vast herds once he legally owned the land. "Those papers," she insisted, "they are proof. They show what kind of man he is. They show he lies." A new light entered Askuk's eyes. He saw the truth of her words. This was not just about one woman or one piece of land. This man, Corbin, was a poison to everyone, settler and Comanche alike. His greed threatened to destroy the delicate balance of the entire region. Those papers were more than just proof of a crime against farmers. They were a weapon. They could expose Corbin to the very soldiers he now commanded. They could prove he was a liar and a cheat, a man whose word could not be trusted. In that moment, their individual struggles merged into a common cause. "You are right," Askuk said, his voice firm. "We must get those papers." They sat by the fire as the sky darkened, the threat of the cavalry a palpable presence on the horizon. A bold and dangerous plan began to take shape between them. "Corbin is arrogant," Eliza said, her voice gaining strength. "He believes he has already won. I heard one of the ranch hands talk of a celebration, a party at the ranch to toast his victory over the Comanche." Askuk nodded slowly, his mind racing. A party meant noise, drink, and distraction. It was a perfect opportunity. A gathering of their enemies could provide the very cover they needed to strike at the heart of the serpent. "My warriors can create a diversion," Askuk planned, drawing lines in the dirt with a stick. "A fire, some noise at the northern edge of his land, far from the house. It will draw most of the guards away. They will think it is the main attack." He looked at Eliza, his gaze serious. "It will be dangerous. They will be looking for my people." He knew he was asking his men to risk their lives on the word of this outsider, but he also knew it was their best chance to avoid a devastating battle with the soldiers. It was a gamble, but the alternative was a fight they might not win. "I can get inside the house," Eliza insisted. "I know the layout. I know where the study is. I even know the combination to the safe. I saw him use it once when he thought I was asleep." Her role was the most dangerous of all. She would have to walk directly into the home of the man who had tormented her, all while her leg was still healing. The limp was a constant, painful reminder of her vulnerability. But the fear she felt was overshadowed by a fierce determination. This was not just about her own revenge anymore. It was about protecting the people who had saved her. As they finalized the details of their plan, a quiet intimacy grew between them. The space around the fire felt like the only safe place in a hostile world. He saw the fire in her spirit, a courage that her broken body could not contain. She saw the wisdom in his eyes, the strength of a leader who cared deeply for his people. He gently checked the bindings on her splint, his touch sending a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. In the face of shared danger, a fragile and unspoken romance began to bloom. A small, beautiful flower growing in the harsh soil of the prairie. The night of the party arrived, loud and brazen. From a ridge overlooking the ranch, Eliza and Askuk watched the house blaze with light. The sound of rough laughter and tinny piano music drifted up to them on the wind. The ranch was filled with Corbin's allies, men as hard and greedy as he was, all celebrating a victory that had not yet been won. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. She wore simple Comanche clothing, her hair braided, hoping the shadows and the revelers' distraction would be enough of a disguise. Askuk gave her a reassuring nod, his hand briefly touching her shoulder. It was time. On Askuk's signal, a flicker of flame appeared at the far northern pasture, quickly growing into a significant blaze. A few moments later, the distinct sound of gunfire echoed from the same direction, followed by war cries that were designed to carry. Just as they predicted, the party's festive mood shattered. Men poured out of the ranch house, grabbing their rifles. Guards shouted orders, organizing a group to ride toward the disturbance. The trap was sprung. The main house, while not empty, was now chaotic, and its main security was drawn away. This was Eliza's chance. She moved through the darkness, her limp a painful, awkward rhythm. She slipped through a side gate, keeping to the deepest shadows, her senses on high alert. The house was even more chaotic from up close. She found a kitchen window that had been left ajar, and, with a surge of effort, pulled herself inside. The study was down a short hallway. She moved as quickly as she could, her moccasins silent on the floorboards. The room was blessedly empty, smelling of stale smoke and whiskey. She hurried to the large oil painting of a cattle herd, pulling it aside to reveal the dark metal door of the safe. Her fingers, though trembling, were steady as she turned the dial. Left, right, left. The numbers Corbin had been so careless with were burned into her memory. A soft click rewarded her efforts. The heavy door swung open. Inside, a small stack of papers sat beside a few bags of coin. She ignored the money, her hand closing around the precious documents. A wave of triumph washed over her. She had done it. She turned to leave, her heart soaring with relief, only to freeze in the doorway. Corbin stood there, his face a mask of pure, murderous fury, his eyes locked on the papers in her hand. "Thief," Corbin snarled, the word a low growl. The noise of the party and the distant diversion faded into a dull roar. The world shrank to this one room, to the man blocking her only exit. His eyes were cold and devoid of any humanity. "Did you really think you could escape me? That you could steal from me in my own home?" He took a step into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft, final click. Eliza's blood ran cold. She was trapped. She clutched the papers to her chest, her one and only weapon. "These papers will ruin you," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. Corbin laughed, a chilling sound. "Those papers will be ashes, and you will be buried where no one will ever find you." He lunged, his powerful hands reaching for her throat. Eliza cried out, stumbling backward. At that exact moment, the window behind the desk shattered inward. A dark shape vaulted into the room, landing in a crouch between Eliza and her attacker. It was Askuk. He rose to his full height, a hunting knife gleaming in his hand. His eyes, fixed on Corbin, were like chips of obsidian, burning with a cold, protective fire. The two men circled each other, a silent, deadly dance. Corbin, larger and fueled by rage, snatched a heavy fireplace poker. He swung it wildly, forcing Askuk to dodge and weave. The room became a whirlwind of violence, the sounds of grunts and heavy blows mixing with the crash of overturned furniture. Corbin was a brute, relying on raw strength. Askuk was a warrior, his movements economical and precise. He moved like a panther, waiting for his moment, for the one mistake that would give him the opening he needed. Corbin overextended on a wild swing, leaving himself exposed for a fraction of a second. It was all Askuk needed. He moved inside the clumsy arc of the poker, his knife flashing. The fight was over in a heartbeat. Corbin gasped, a look of stunned disbelief on his face. The poker clattered to the floor. He took a staggering step backward and then collapsed, his reign of terror ending in the silence of his own study. Askok stood over him for a moment, his chest heaving. Then he turned to Eliza, his eyes searching her face for any sign of injury, his expression softening with relief when he saw she was unharmed. The arrival of Major Davies and his cavalry patrol was met not with a scene of savage depredation, but with a dead cattle baron and a woman holding a stack of legal documents. The party guests, sobered by the violence, stood around in stunned silence. Eliza, with Askok standing quietly by her side, did not wait for the questions. She handed the fraudulent contracts to the major and began her story. She spoke with a clear, steady voice, detailing Corbin's betrayal, his cruelty, and the web of lies he had spun to steal land and incite a war for his own profit. Corbin's reputation, once so powerful, crumbled to dust. Several of the ranchers at the party, upon seeing the contracts, confirmed they had been duped. They had been his allies in a fight against the Comanche, but they would not be his partners in fraud. With Eliza's testimony and the undeniable proof of the papers, the truth became clear. Major Davies, his face grim with the realization that he had been a pawn, officially dropped all charges against the Comanche tribe. The threat of war vanished like a morning mist. In the weeks that followed, peace settled over the valley. Eliza's family, their legal ownership of the land and its precious spring now secure, began to rebuild their lives. Eliza stayed in the Comanche camp, where Nayate's skill and Askok's constant, gentle care worked a profound healing. The bones in her leg mended, and with time, the limp that had been a symbol of her captivity faded until it was gone. But the deeper healing was in her soul. She found a sense of belonging and a quiet joy she had never known before. The fear that had haunted her was replaced by love. Eliza and Askok were married not with the hollow words of a preacher, but under the vast, open sky surrounded by the people who had become her true family. Their union was not a bargain or a contract, but a bond of respect, courage, and deep affection. Years passed. A daughter with her mother's bright eyes and a son with his father's quiet strength played along the banks of the creek that flowed freely through her family's land. Their laughter was a testament to a new beginning, a living symbol that two different worlds could come together to create a single, beautiful, and resilient family.